All right, so we're talking about great faith today and how faith can actually accomplish things. We talked earlier about how Jesus, he's always going for faith. That's the thing he's looking for. More than any other change in the world, in anyone's life, what Jesus wants to see happen is that faith would grow. Why is that? We're going to answer that question today. So stories of great faith. I'm going to start out for us. This is an illustration. I guess it's about my dad. I guess this illustration is about my dad. How many of you are familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous? We've talked about the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous are based on the Bible, and they are really good. They're really good steps. So the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous is this. AA, if you don't know, it's just like a program for helping people who are addicted to alcohol or other things overcome that. And it's been highly successful, more successful than other similar programs. But of course, still lots of people don't succeed in overcoming addiction through AA or through anything else. Okay, so step number one is this. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. That's step number one. And I guess there's a little bit more to it. We couldn't manage our own lives. Basically, this step is I can't do it. I can't do it. That's the first step. Notice how similar that is to what we've been talking about over the past number of weeks. Right? We've been talking about humility, admitting that God doesn't owe us anything, that we actually need Him more than we need anything else. That's one of the main teachings we've seen so far in the book of Luke that we're going through. Interesting. Step number two is this. We came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. That's a cool picture, isn't it? We came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous sort of takes God away from this and turns it into a power, just any sort of thing that I might want to believe in greater than myself. So here's the story. My dad, the whole time I was growing up, really was an alcoholic, and that was rough. I won't go into all the sob stories. Some of you have had experiences with people who are addicted to things, and it's really hard. It's really, really hard. So he almost died kind of when I was a teenager from that. He got to kind of a low point, checked himself into a rehab program that was for like alcohol and narcotics addiction, and then became part of AA for a long time. Now, my dad actually was able to succeed in overcoming his alcohol addiction in remarkable ways, although my dad was weird. He was a weird guy. So he overcame alcohol by drinking near beer. Do you know what near beer is? So he was addicted to beer, so instead he went to non-alcoholic beer and just drank it. Like he would probably, like some people drink Coke all the time, he would drink non-alcoholic beer for the rest of his life, like maybe 3 or 4 a day. But there's no alcohol, so it's okay. It's all good. And he continued to work part of the time in bars. That seems like the most unwise thing you could ever do if you're a recovering alcoholic is to work in a bar. And yet he did it for probably 20 years and never relapsed, not even once. Now, he also, this program that he went through, this recovery program, he went through it with a whole bunch of other guys, and he kept in touch with all of them afterwards. And my dad was the only one who succeeded long-term out of the whole group. I don't actually know how many people were in there, but he told me this over and over again. Isaac, they all fell back. They all fell back. And he would tell me, and I asked him a few times, but he would tell me, even when I didn't ask him, he always wanted to tell me the reason he was able to succeed. And the reason he was able to succeed is that he turned his life back to God after he got out of that program. He started, every morning he would read his Bible. That became a religious habit for him. He would get up at 5:30, read his Bible. He would pray during that time. He started going back to church. That was always a struggle. He was kind of back and forth with, was he really part of a church for a long time? But he turned his life back to God, and he was very adamant about this point. You cannot succeed at this without faith in Jesus Christ. It's impossible. But it is possible with faith. That's the kind of accomplishment. That's the kind of thing that faith accomplishes. This is why when Jesus looks at us in our lives and we think, here's my list of problems. Here's the things I need to change in my life. This, and this. And Jesus says, nope, none of that really matters. What you need is more faith. And we say, really? Is that really the thing? We're going to see that today as we look at Luke chapter 7. We're in a series right now. The series of messages is called Amazed, collections of stories from Luke, which is a book in the Bible, to last week, which is this last week in your life. So what we're doing is we're looking at a whole bunch of stories that Luke collected. He went around and collected eyewitness accounts of what happened while Jesus was walking around on earth. That's why we get in this series some accounts that are not in the other accounts of Jesus' life. Matthew and John and Mark. We're also collecting stories of things God has done in our lives, whether it was 10 years ago or this last week. And so we're encouraging you to turn those in, bring those to us, and we're going to share those more and more. We did that a little bit today, and we're going to keep doing that every week. So when you have a story, when you see something or are reminded of something that God has done in your life, it's important that you share that with other people so that faith can grow. That's one of the things that causes faith to increase. Okay, we're going to see today why that's so important. So tell us when you have a story, when you're reminded of something God did, tell us about it, either me or one of our leaders, then write it down and then share it in some way, whether that is in writing or by video, or you can get up front on a Sunday morning and share that. We can talk about that. Okay, collections from Luke to last week. So today, our message is Amazed by Faith. And this, in some ways, is a unique spot in the Gospel of Luke. We've said in this series, as you go through Luke, this word amazed occurs over and over again. I've said that I think it's because as Luke gathered these people who were there when Jesus was walking around on earth, and he's asking them what happened. He's interviewing them. Tell me about it. And their response very often, I think, is to search for words. They're trying to come up with, it's hard for me to describe what it was like to be around Jesus. And the word that keeps coming up over and over again is amazing. It was astonishing. It blew my mind. It was not like anything else I had ever experienced. I can't even express it to you what it was like to be around him. It was amazing. So that word, the word amazed, occurs over and over in the Gospel of Luke. But there is exactly one place in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus himself is amazed. And we're going to look at that today. Only one place. There were lots of things. When Jesus healed someone who was born blind or who was born crippled, or when he walked on water, or when he fed 5,000 people with a handful of crumbs, none of that amazed him. None of it. There's only one thing that amazed him, and we're going to see what it is today. And when you see it, it's faith. You're going to see that it's faith. It's not a secret. When you see what amazed him, at first you're going to kind of think, why does that amaze him so much? Jesus sees the world a whole different way than we do. And our challenge is to kind of rework our thinking so that we start to see the world like he does. He is the truth. He knows what life is really like and what makes it work. Okay. So this section, we're going to be in Luke chapter 7 today. We're going to read through it once, and I'm going to say a few things, mostly about centurions, understanding who this particular guy is. So we're looking at a centurion who believes, a centurion who has faith. So we're going to talk about that for a minute and read through the section. Then we're going to dig into what comes before in order to help us understand why Jesus is so amazed by faith. I think that's a key today to walk away with. Why is this so amazing to him? And then we'll come back at the end with a couple of application points. So a centurion who believes. Okay, so here we go. When Jesus had finished saying all this, and we'll come back to what all this was in just a minute. To the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. So he goes back into Capernaum's a larger town near where he grew up. And there, a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. So the centurion does not go himself to see Jesus. He sends some other people. He knows the most important Jewish people in town. He sends them to ask Jesus for him. Why? We'll see in just a second. When those elders had come to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this," the centurion deserves it, "because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." We'll come back and unpack this in a minute. So Jesus went with them. So Jesus is going to do it. So he's going to the centurion's house. And he's not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof." Now, if you've been here in this series, this should kind of ring some bells because this is not the same words, but a similar sentiment that we've seen a number of times in Luke, where someone says, "I actually don't deserve anything from God. I don't deserve anything. Everything, I'm full of sin, and God doesn't have to give me anything." This is, interestingly, a humble centurion. "That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you." This is still the message the centurion sent. "But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell one soldier, 'Go,' and he goes, and I tell another soldier, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant," or this can also be translated slave, make no mistake, the people that are working for him, most of them are slaves, "Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, Jesus doesn't even keep going to the house anymore. He doesn't say, "Okay, the servant's healed." He just immediately starts teaching. He turns to the crowd and he says, "This is what I'm talking about. Here's what I'm telling you. You guys, I've just been teaching you a lot of stuff. This is what I'm trying to teach you. I have not found such great faith as this, even in the nation of Israel." This centurion that he's found has the greatest faith of anyone Jesus has seen. So, we need to figure out what's going on here. Why is Jesus so amazed? On the surface of it, all we've got is a centurion wanted his servant to be healed, and yeah, he's a humble guy, and he trusts that Jesus can heal this guy without showing up in person. Even if he doesn't see Jesus face to face, he believes that Jesus can heal the guy. And that, out of everything that happens in all the Gospels, in Jesus' whole ministry, more than walking on water, more than calming the storms, more than the widow giving, more than all of these amazing stories, that is the one thing that amazes Jesus. Why? Why is that so amazing? Okay, let's talk about what a centurion is for a minute. And we probably know, but we should unpack it a little bit. Anybody love Roman Empire stuff? You love thinking about the Roman Empire, talking about it. Did you know this is so hilarious to me? You guys know what TikTok is, right? I am not on TikTok at all. You should not be either. Get off of it right now. It's a spy network, okay? But there was a TikTok trend, apparently, a couple of weeks back, or maybe it was about a month ago, where some guy was talking about how he thinks, his wife asked him something about the Roman Empire, and he said he thinks about the Roman Empire every day. And then it became this TikTok trend to go and ask men if they think about the Roman Empire very often. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? And apparently for a lot of men, it's like very often, like every day. What about guys in this room? Do you think about the Roman Empire? Who thinks about the Roman Empire more than once a week? Anybody? I'm curious. Different empire. Same idea. Tyler thinks about a different empire. I think about the Roman Empire guaranteed every day. Every single day, I think about the Roman Empire. Although I realize, for me, the reason I think about the Roman Empire is because of the Bible. That's why I think about the Roman Empire all the time. It's because Jesus and the apostles were living in the Roman Empire. Anyway. But even when I was a kid, I was a little bit obsessed. I remember the first time I got a book about Roman armor. Oh man, I just read those 5 pages about the armor the Romans would wear. I read those 5 pages 100 times. I was just obsessed with it. Okay, so these are legionaries, right? In the early Roman Empire, Roman equipment did change, and what the structure of the Roman Empire changed over time. But we're talking about the first century here, so the time of Jesus. And, so this is sort of the regular soldier. And this picture, what I want you to get a feeling for is the kind of power that a centurion had. All right, a centurion led about how many soldiers? What do you think? About 100 soldiers? Weirdly, it was different at different times. Centurion is based on century, right? So it's based on the word for the number 100. You would think they led 100 soldiers. Maybe at some point in Roman history they did. In this time period, they usually led about 80 soldiers. So, I don't know, roughly 100. Maybe they were always inflating their numbers. There's 80 people there, and they say, oh, we got about 100. I don't know. So they led about 80 soldiers. And this is what those soldiers would look like when they were lined up. What kind of, our church, on a good day, we have about 80 people in the room. On one of our larger days, at least lately. So you know kind of what 80 people looks like, but we don't look like that, do we? So I want you to think about not just what 80 people looks like, but what is 80? It's almost more like, first of all, these people are under his direct command, this centurion. He says it himself. Whatever I tell them to do, they do. And this is even more so than like an employee and an employer, right? Sometimes today, I don't know if this ever happens where you work, but an employer might tell their employee to do something, and sometimes the employees don't do it, right? Now, if you don't do it enough, you might eventually get fired. That's the consequence. What do you think happened if these soldiers didn't do what their commanding officer told them to do? Whatever he wanted, that's what happened. Whatever the centurion wanted to happen is what happened. If they directly disobeyed an order, I'm sure they would have been whipped for that. So how much do you think they obeyed the orders? Yeah, right. In addition to that, there are people who are, this is like, you could think of it like a business in some ways, like a medium to large business, because there are lots of other employees or servants that are part of this, right? There are slaves who are serving them, cooking for them, cleaning for them, taking care of their armor. There are people who are, taking care of the barracks in addition to the soldiers. So this is not just 80 guys milling around. So think about the kind of power that this centurion has. What kind of person would you expect the centurion to be? I'll just leave it to there probably was quite a wide array of personalities among centurions. This is the highest level you could get to in the Roman army, basically without being an officer or a noble, right? This is the highest, centurion is the highest level that you could climb to from being a regular soldier enlisted in the army. It's kind of like a sergeant in some armies today, except you had a lot more power than a sergeant, actually, and you led a lot more people, okay? Other funny thing about centurions is they wore this helmet, at least. There's kind of debate about centurions, what helmet. If you try to look this up, nobody really knows what they wore. Nobody really knows. Weird, huh? But this is one of the likely things that they wore, and there are pictures of them, of some of them wearing this. They probably wore different things at different times. Why do you think that it's horsehair on the top of a crest? Why do you think they wore that? Be seen, that's a good one. Yeah, Romans were very practical. That's almost for sure one of the reasons. That's probably the most common explanation, is in the middle of battle, your 80 soldiers could see you better if you were wearing that ridiculous. I think it looks kind of cool when it goes backwards like this, right? That looks like, yeah, you're a pretty cool looking soldier, right? But when it looks like this, I just think, at least to my mind, you look ridiculous wearing that. Just absolutely absurd. But that's true of a lot of things in the past. I'm sure it didn't look like that to them. Another theory, which is really interesting, is that the Romans wore crests because they were short. Romans were significantly shorter than most of the enemies that they fought. And so there's a theory that they were trying to make because even sometimes the regular soldiers would wear crests too. And so there's a theory that in some battles, like if they were fighting the Germans, they would wear crests. I wish Richard was here today. He's a German who comes to our church who is 6'3". So he's way taller than me. So if I were fighting Richard, which I'm not going to do, I might wear this huge crest so that I would look closer to his height and be a little bit more scary. Yeah. That's all just sort of interesting trivia about centurions. But we need some of that to help enter into the mindset here. So if we think about this centurion and what his life was like, we'll just sit on this picture while we talk about it. You know, you would expect this guy is a person who, especially in a relatively small city like Capernaum, this is a guy who is very well respected. He's an enemy of the Jewish people. He works for the bad guys, but he's very powerful. What we've also seen, sort of counterintuitively, is that even though the Romans are the oppressors in this situation, what is true about this centurion? He has done a whole bunch of stuff for the Jewish people, right? What does it say? He is a friend of the Jewish people. This man deserves to have you come and heal them. This is the elders of town, the elders of the Jews coming to Jesus and saying, this guy really deserves your help, even though, because they expect Jesus won't want to heal him because he's a Roman. Although that's not how Jesus rolls, right? But they expect that. They say he deserves it because he loves the Jewish nation and has built our synagogue. That's very interesting because what it might mean is that this centurion is a believer in some sense. There were lots of people in the first century, we see later in the book of Acts, which Luke also wrote, who Luke calls God-fearers. And these are people, it's sort of a class of people who kind of wanted to be Jewish. As they read the Old Testament, they learned about the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. They loved it, and they loved the God of the Jewish nation. They came to believe that this was the one true God of the world, but they couldn't follow all the Jewish rules because of the society they lived in. Right? They were kind of like, well, I really want to follow your God, but bacon, right? You know, I mean, I don't know if that's really what they were like. There were lots of rules that would have actually separated them from their own culture. They wouldn't have been able to hang out with their own families sometimes, in some cases, if they had fully become Jewish. These people are often called God-fearers. And certainly a centurion in the Roman army could not have become a follower of the Jewish laws and kept his job. That would not have been possible. So the fact that he's done this might mean he's one of these people. He's probably read some of the Old Testament. He maybe believes in the God of the Bible, but he can't fully become Jewish. Okay, so that's another piece about this centurion. And then this piece, the last piece we'll say before we dig into talking about why is Jesus so amazed at his faith, is what that faith is. That faith that the centurion has is all about not having to see Jesus, but still believing that Jesus can do anything he decides to do. There's a moment, of course, later at the end of the book of John, where Jesus has risen from the dead, right? And he goes to all of his disciples and he appears to them, and they are amazed. Yeah, no kidding. He's alive again from the dead. He's still got the wounds in his hands and his feet, his side. But one of the disciples is not there. Who was it that wasn't there? Thomas wasn't there. And so Thomas comes back when Jesus isn't there, and he says, I'm never going to believe. That's crazy to think this guy rose from the dead. I'm not going to believe unless I see him and put my hand into the wound in his side. And then, of course, later Jesus appears to Thomas, and he says, here's my wounds, right? It's this dramatic moment. And Thomas falls down on his knees, says, my Lord and my God. But right after that, Jesus says something very interesting. He says, Thomas, you have seen. You've seen me, and you believe. But he says, blessed, truly blessed are those who without seeing me still believe. There's something in Jesus that in his teaching that says if you can believe without seeing, there's still lots of evidence on which to base your faith. But without actually having Jesus right up in front of you, if you can believe in him and trust him, there's something powerful about that. That's the kind of faith he's looking for. And we can see in the centurion part of what that involves, right? So here's what the centurion says. I myself am a man under authority. Okay? So what does this mean? This means he has superior officers in his army, right? Those officers help him in lots of ways. They provide funding for him. They provide the troops. But they also give him orders. And is he allowed to disobey those orders? Absolutely not. He's a man under authority. He also has soldiers under him, so same thing for them. So you could think of it this way. This centurion is part of a particular kingdom. Now, the Romans didn't call their empire a kingdom. They tried to pretend it wasn't. They tried to pretend it was a republic. But it is a kingdom. There was a ruler at the top. Who was the ruler at this moment in history? The ruler at this moment was Tiberius Caesar. Excellent. So Tiberius is at the top. Whatever he says goes. But underneath, he also, there are different levels of authority in this kingdom. So he can tell his soldiers to do something and they have to go do it. And there's something about the way that this centurion is embedded in a kingdom and that authority structure. And there's something about that. And when he hears about what's going on with Jesus, he recognizes that Jesus is also a powerful leader in a different kind of kingdom. What was Jesus constantly talking about? The first sermon Jesus ever preached was simply this: the time has come. The kingdom of God is right here. Repent and believe the good news. He was constantly talking about a kingdom that he was part of and that you could become part of too. The centurion recognizes it. He sees that just like he gives a command to a soldier and it happens, Jesus is he's part of some sort of unseen kingdom, some sort of army that is not an earthly army. When Jesus is on trial in front of Pontius Pilate asks him, "Are you a king?" What does Jesus answer? He says, "My kingdom is not of this world." He is a king. His kingdom is invisible, at least right now. So the soldier recognizes that Jesus has this authority. He's like a centurion, or maybe even someone much, much more powerful than a centurion, but in a different kind of kingdom. That's the faith that Jesus is commending here. All right, let's go in and talk for a few minutes about why. So Jesus is amazed by faith. You can write that down in your notes. But we need to understand, why is it so amazing? Why is faith the thing that Jesus is constantly talking about, constantly harping on? More than you need to be healed of, leprosy, or more than you need to be able to walk or have your blindness healed, you need faith. That's the thing he says over and over and over again. Is that true? And if it's true, why is it true? So in John chapter 7, we are, unsurprisingly, John chapter 7:1 comes right after the end of Luke chapter 7 verse 1 comes right after the end of Luke chapter 6. And in Luke chapter 6 is a very famous section of teaching. The whole second half of chapter 6, most of chapter 6, is all teaching from Jesus. It is what's sometimes called the Sermon on the Plain. You've heard of the Sermon on the Mount, right? But this is sort of the other version that happens in Luke. Instead of being on a hillside, it's on a level place, a plain. And in this sermon, Jesus basically, it's kind of, the sermon itself is kind of like a bullet point summary of all the things that Jesus taught his disciples to do. And so what I'm going to do right now is go through, not the whole sermon, but just bullet points of the sermon. So you can see, kind of from a bird's eye view, what did Jesus teach his disciples to do? He was constantly saying, have faith, have faith, have faith, then come follow me. And once a person said yes to that, what were they supposed to do when they followed him? Here we go, check this out. Oh, as we go through this, I want you to think about, are these things easy or hard? How would a person actually do these things? So here's how the sermon begins, right? Blessings and woes. He says that the people who are really blessed are people who have no money and who don't have anything to eat and who are weeping and persecuted. That's the people who should be jumping. He actually says they should be leaping for joy, those people. And the people that are really in trouble are the rich and people who have lots to eat and laughing all the time and are super popular. Those are the people who should be crying. That's what he says. What? And then he goes into a section where he basically says this, right? The whole section could be entitled Love Your Enemies, but there's a bunch of subpoints. You need to love people who hate you. You need to do good to them. People who curse you, you need to bless them. Pray for people who mistreat you. Offer the other cheek. So just like in Matthew, you need to, if somebody slaps you on one side of your face, you need to give them the other side of your face to slap. Anyone who asks you for help, you need to help them. Treat others the way you would want them to treat you. So the golden rule. Easy or hard? What do you think? Right? I mean, really, when people encounter this, I know we've heard this teaching a lot if we've grown up in church. When people encounter this for the first time, especially from other cultures, if they didn't grow up with these kinds of ideas, these ideas seem absolutely impossible and even foolish in some ways. What? Why would you do that? Then he goes into a section on not judging other people. Don't judge or condemn other people, ever. Forgive everybody who does something wrong to you. The measure you use will be measured to you. You got to be gracious with other people and correct yourself before you correct other people. How often does that happen in the world? And then finally, he wraps up with this section. This is pretty much the whole Sermon on the Plain, right? He wraps up with this section. A good tree doesn't bear bad fruit, or vice versa. So what's on the inside? It's what's on the inside of a person that determines what comes out. It's not all the stuff that's happening to you that wrecks your life or makes your life good or bad. It's what's inside of you, regardless of your circumstances. That's what makes life good or bad. People are known by their actions as a tree is known by its fruit, because what's on the inside of a person always comes out. So what you've got to actually change is what's deepest inside of you. Okay. So that's basically the sermon, right? He does end up with the wise and foolish builders. Anyone who puts this teaching into practice is wise. Anyone who doesn't is foolish. Eventually, your entire life is going to collapse if you're building your life on your own action instead of on Jesus' teaching. So that's the whole thing. So let's notice a couple of things. So as we come into this story of the centurion, what the crowds have just heard from him is all of this. And it must seem impossible to them. They've said, we see that you are amazing. We are amazed by you. We want to follow you. What should we do? And he says, here's what you should do. Go do all of this. And imagine, the situation, loving your enemies, might not seem that hard. It is very difficult in every life. But it might not seem as hard if your enemies are people who are mostly people of goodwill toward you. What if your enemies, like was the situation in Israel then, the situation then was much like it is today. What if your enemies were people who hated you and wanted to kill you? How possible would this seem? How wise would this teaching seem? And so I think as they come out of this, message, what most of the crowd is feeling like is this teaching is absolutely impossible. It's absolutely impossible to achieve. But what Jesus knows is that there is one way to get there. Faith. A change in the deepest part of a human being. That's what faith actually is. Believing something different. The whole situation in Israel right now, the war, the fight that seems like it can never, ever end, the reason is because of what people believe. That's the source of the fight. 100% it is. There's no kind of, we're just using that as an example, right? But there's no kind of negotiation or foreign aid or war. None of that will ever stop the fight because the fight comes from something inside people. That's true in our lives as well. The change that needs to happen is at the deepest level inside a human being. And that's why Jesus is always talking about faith. Because it's impossible to live the way that he wants you to live without faith. Because constant help from God is required to live that way. no human being can live the way that Jesus teaches us to live on our own. It's absolutely impossible. We need constant, what the Bible calls grace. What grace actually is God doing stuff to help you all the time. That's what grace is. It's God, you don't deserve it, and God's just pouring out help to help you be the person you were really made to be. That's what grace is, and we need it every second of every day. We were just at a Matt Maher concert, a few of us this week. Who was at the Matt Maher concert? Lord, I need you. Yes, I need you. Every hour, I need you. Every hour. Sometimes when I sing that, I change it to like every second, because that's really what it is for me. Every second. And the only way that you can access this grace is faith. Only the person who's truly humble and then comes to God believing that even though we can't see him, he's going to help us anyway, so we ask him for help. Those are the only people who will be able to live the life to any degree that Jesus is talking about. What would the world be like if even 20% of people in the world lived the way Jesus describes in that sermon? What would it be like? War would end worldwide. The world would be like heaven on earth. And in fact, in some ways, that's what it would be. Jesus' kingdom lived out in the earth. All right. So what Jesus sees when he sees this centurion? This centurion should be this guy, he's got all this earthly power. He should be this guy who lords it over other people, who thinks he's just God's gift to the world, who thinks he's so amazing by his power. This centurion is humble. He says he's not even worthy for Jesus to be in his presence or to be in Jesus' presence. That's the first thing Jesus sees in him. The second thing Jesus sees in him is that he believes. He believes that Jesus can and will help him, even though he doesn't deserve it, and even if he can't see him. And that is what stuns Jesus. Because he knows that a person like that can actually live out his teaching by God's power. When he sees this centurion, he doesn't see what we see. He sees a person. He sees a person who can live in the kingdom of heaven, in a different kind of realm, not just the kingdom of Rome. He sees a person who can actually live the way he has described. And when he sees that, he turns to the crowd around him and he says, "This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about." Jesus is constantly talking about faith because faith is the only thing that can really change us. It's the groundwork. God is the one who really changes us, but it's only when we come to him in humility and then in faith that change can really take effect. When we believe that he will do what he says he's going to do, when we believe that he's going to help us, even when the evidence right in front of our eyes says everything's awful, I need to take matters into my own hands. I need to look out for number one in this situation. That's why when Jesus looks at the world, and we think our problem is, I need more money, or I need less stress, or I need a house, or I need a different car, or I need to fix this situation in my job, or I need a different. He says, no. What you need is increased faith. That's basically the only thing that matters. Let's pray, and we'll continue in worship.